So in today's video, we're gonna talk about how I fixed my relationship with food, something that I have struggled with for over 20 plus years, because food to me wasn't food, it was comfort. And here's how I went about fixing that. First things first, before we jump into the video of how I did that, let's obviously give you guys a little bit of a backstory on who I am and the things that I've done. My name is Alfonso Lopez, if you can't tell by the name of this YouTube channel. I own a coaching company called Let's Work, where we help men and women become the best version of themselves through health and fitness. And here's how, or not here's how, here's a little bit of a backstory on me and just kind of how I grew up. I grew up the fat and out of shape kid from the time I could remember, from the early years of childhood, early elementary to junior high to high school, even to the beginning of college. I was extremely overweight, exceeding a weight or reaching a weight of 300 pounds, which is pretty crazy to say considering I am 5'7". So obviously, as you can tell by my weights and just kind of my story, food was just always this thing that I personally struggle with. And if you also can't tell by this video, I am Hispanic. I do have to feel like I have to put that out there as a disclaimer, because if you know anything about the Hispanic culture, food is involved in every single thing that you do, from family gatherings to social gatherings, and not just like a little bit of food, it is a lot of food. When I say it's a lot of food, I mean it's like you're gonna eat 2 to 3 servings, and if you're not, you're definitely be taking 2 to 3 servings to go. But like I said, I grew up the fat and out of shape kid, and that was really just my entire childhood until I got to college. Once I got to college, I ended up losing 100 pounds, which was great. And obviously food wasn't that big of a struggle for me personally, because I just didn't struggle with it. It wasn't necessarily a thought. And after losing that 100 pounds, I made this decision, that I was going to do a bodybuilding show. So the next step of action that I took was I hired a bodybuilding coach. And I worked with that coach for a very, very long time. About 8 months, just kind of getting my body right to be able to handle a bodybuilding show prep. I ended up starting the bodybuilding show prep, and I actually ended up dropping out of it because I had a big life event that was me dropping out of college. Now keep in mind, this entire time I did not struggle with food. Food wasn't even a thought in my head. I just didn't struggle with it, man. I was extremely disciplined. I was extremely routine. I loved going to class. I loved going to school. I loved everything about it. It truly was really fun. And I just felt good about myself. But after dropping out of college, I slowly started to struggle with food again. Wasn't necessarily aware of why I was doing it, but I was struggling. I was binge eating. I was binge eating donuts, pizzas, any sweet treats, protein bars. It's a place that I worked at sold protein bars, a lot of them. And I was just essentially binge eating. I eventually kind of kicked myself out of this phase and, evened out. Gained a little bit of weight, but not enough where it was like a very, very big difference in myself. But I eventually ended up like evening out, which was like a huge blessing because I finally kind of got it under control. Ended up, losing a little more weight, getting in better shape, setting myself up for a successful bodybuilding show. And I signed myself up to do a bodybuilding show. Ended up doing a 37-week prep, which is a really long time. There's 52 weeks in a year. I dieted for 37 weeks. As you probably know, not the smartest idea. And most bodybuilding preps anyways are 16 to 24 weeks. I did mine for 37 freaking weeks, which is a very, 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 very long time. And of course, since you diet for that long and you starve yourself for weeks on end on 1,000 calories, you're definitely gonna struggle with food after. I was kind of naive and a little ignorant, maybe a little egotistical, where I was like, yeah, that ain't gonna be me. I struggled really, really bad post-show. But I wasn't really aware to the sense of like, oh, I'm struggling because of this reason. This is a pattern of mine. I'm struggling because I put myself in a really big deficit food-wise. Hormones are changing. I had a big life change during that time as well, where I was leaving my job. Just a lot of life changes. So I kind of chalked it up to post-show blues that I struggled with for a very long time. But then, I finally got myself back under wraps, under check, and I was like, cool, I'm all good to go. I got the 40 pounds that I gained off of me. I actually almost ended up gaining like 100 pounds, which is pretty crazy. But I got 40 of that off, was back at a good body composition, feeling right, feeling good. And then I ran into another issue. I started to binge eat again, but this time it was a lot worse. At the time I was working in a warehouse and I was just kind of isolated by myself. And for some reason that isolation just really ended up getting to me. And because of that, I would just binge eat. I would binge eat pizzas. I would binge eat donuts. To be quite honest with you, I'm pretty embarrassed to say this, but it is what it is, right? This is my struggle with food. I would just binge eat thousands and thousands and thousands of calories in one sitting. Would obviously spend a lot of money too, but I would just binge eat a lot of food. And at the time, I wasn't really aware of it again. I was like, man, I'm just like binge eating. I didn't know why though. I just knew it made me feel good, right? So I kept doing it. Ended up putting 40 pounds on, and it looked like I had put 40 pounds on. And I also ended up wrecking my gut and my hormones in the process, because whenever you're having all this processed food sitting in your gut, fermenting in your gut, it is going to cause issues, which is exactly what I personally ran into. So I ended up getting this weight off of me that I eventually ended up, gaining back, or not eventually getting back. I got this weight off of me that I had gained back, got myself into somewhat of a semi position, which is kind of like a happy medium, like wasn't like freaking out, like, okay, let's take it to an extreme. Was just comfortable with where I got myself, which was around like 215, 220 pounds. This is where I felt good. Eventually ended up kind of figuring things out, had some other life changes, eventually ended up, losing a little bit more weight, getting down to like 210, just through dieting, keeping track of my macros, like nothing too crazy, right? Just like really hitting a groove. Eventually ended up hitting an even better groove and like was just firing all cylinders. Body composition was great, health was great, hormones were great, mental health was phenomenal. But then I had another big life change, and I ran into this issue with food again. But this time I was actually aware of it. You see, whenever the awareness kicked in, it was pretty weird. I was like, man, for some reason, I keep reverting back to food whenever I don't feel good enough, whenever I don't know what I'm doing, whenever I feel lonely, insecure about myself, not loved, all these different things. I just tend to revert back for food, and I couldn't figure out why. And I also reverted to this other thing too, which I may touch on in another video. A lot of people also struggle with this. They just won't admit it. Guys really do struggle with this, but like I said, we'll touch on that on a later video. But pretty much, I was really aware as to like, man, I'm kind of noticing this cycle I have. Whenever I feel these emotions, I don't feel good enough. I feel just very negative in my head. Food just is that thing that I personally run to. And at the time as well, I had a friend, really good friend of mine that I was working with. So he was super aware of like, what's going on? Why are you doing this? Why are you running from? Why are you running towards food? And I really didn't know. Because of that, I knew I needed some extra help, because this was just like a repeating cycle that I was starting to notice throughout my life. And I was like, man, I really don't know why I do this. So now I was like, okay, well, let me figure out what it is I need to do differently, because what I'm doing isn't working. So let me reach out to help, or for some help. So I reached out to a therapist that I used to work with. We never really touched base on anything about food because it just never really came up. But I was like, hey, do you have any references for something, or what they call EMDR therapy? It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So reprocessing, I always kind of butcher that. But it's a very, very intensive type of therapy. Like when I say very intensive, very difficult, man. Probably one of the harder things I personally have done, because it really, really makes you diagnose the source and the belief that you have about yourself and why you take certain actions. And it's really hard. So I decided to dive into that with the lady. The lady was the EMDR therapist, which was super helpful. And like I mentioned, it was one of the harder things that I'd done, because essentially what it is you have this belief about yourself that forms this action. And because you form this action, you just continue to like stay in this loop and stuck in this cycle, whatever it comes to this belief pattern. Some people have it with alcohol. Some people have it with like PTSD. That's kind of what a lot of this therapy is known for, is people that really, really struggle with PTSD, sexual abuse, mental abuse, verbal abuse, military PTSD, like extreme forms of post-traumatic stress disorder. I wouldn't say I necessarily had PTSD. I just had life events that formed certain belief patterns about myself. And because I had these certain belief patterns about myself, I took certain actions that reflected those beliefs. So essentially what we did was we really nailed into, where did this belief start? Like, what was the event in my life that caused me to personally start binge eating? And while it was difficult to like say, hey, I started binge eating in this moment as a kid, we ended up pinpointing a moment that has always stuck with me and then slowly working our way back from there. Now, throughout this EMDR process, I will say it was not easy, because once you start to kind of dive into why it is that you think the way that you think and why it is that you do the things that you do, a lot of other things come with it as well. I won't touch base on that in today's video, but a lot came with it that was extremely difficult, but I'm extremely grateful that I did it because I was able to then address it. But whenever it came to the food thing, a lot of it came from just early childhood beliefs that I had about myself and just how I really operated because of certain beliefs that were kind of put onto me. I don't want to say that in like a victim way, but just the reality of the situation, where I always just felt not good enough, and I always felt like I wasn't loved, and I always just felt like I wasn't good enough, man. Because I didn't feel good enough about myself, food was the thing that made me feel good. So whenever I dropped out of college and I had this huge catastrophic event that happened in my life, where a lot of the people in my life definitely said some things that were pretty hurtful at the time. I've forgiven them since then, but it's pretty hurtful. It formed this belief about me. And because I had this belief about me, I would then go and binge eat to feel better about myself. And then as a kid, kind of the same patterns. I had another big life event where it involved some close relatives, and because of that event, it formed some beliefs about myself. And because of that, I wanted to feel good about myself. And what made me feel good? Food. So the EMDR was essentially allowing us to go back in time and to revisit those memories and actually allow that memory to no longer be a memory that holds power or holds belief. I really want to make sure I explain this correctly, because I don't want to sway people in the wrong direction when it comes to EMDR. So hopefully I'm doing a good job. But you would take this belief that you have about yourself and this event that kind of correlates with it, right, that it's attached to, and you would allow that event to kind of go to the past, right? Not necessarily forget about it, but it's just there. But you disattach the belief that you formed because of that event. So my belief was, I'm not good enough because I don't have a college degree, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. And I disattached all those beliefs about myself and rewired my brain, like literally rewired my brain throughout that process. So much so where after an EMDR session, I would go home and just eat a ton of food. Not in like a binge eating way, but like I'd go to Sprouts, get 2 sweet potatoes, some sprouts, some green beans, a steak, an 8 to 12 ounce steak, and I would just eat all of that and wake up 2 pounds lighter the next day, each and every single time, because my brain was just burning a ton of calories and doing a ton of work and just rewiring the neural pathways in my brain. So I pretty much disattached this belief that I had to these events in my life. And it truly was one of the biggest blessings of my life, because I no longer struggle with binge eating. I no longer struggle with, oh, I don't feel good enough, I don't feel adequate enough, I don't have what it takes. Like these negative limiting beliefs that were formed on me, they are just things that I personally no longer struggle with, because that is where the binge eating was coming from. Because like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, throughout my story, food just always made me feel good, but I really didn't know why, right? Like as a kid, if I didn't feel good, well, I just eat some food. As an adult, a young adult, my early 20s, whenever I dropped out of college and a few other life events after that, whenever I didn't feel good, whenever I didn't feel adequate enough, well, food was the thing that I ran to. Now, I no longer struggle with binge eating, and it truly has been one of the biggest blessings of my life, and the EMDR has been one of the biggest blessings of my life. Now, I will say, I gotta wrap this video up because my camera's about to die. There's gonna be other modalities that people can do, from intuitive eating, less restrictive dieting, having a little more freedom, right? Maybe that's gonna work for you, I'm not sure, but that is what worked for me, was the EMDR. Now, hopefully someone took away something from this video where they're like, man, that was super helpful, Alfonso. Maybe I do need to take a deeper step into myself, in the sense of like, why is it that I do that, right? Because whenever you binge eat or you do any other type of vice, right, there's a reason why you're doing it. So being curious enough as like, why do I do this? And then being willing enough to figure out, okay, I do need some extra help and work with someone to kind of diagnose the problem, is then going to allow you to then attack the problem. But if you don't know what the problem is, you're never gonna be able to attack it, because you don't know what you're looking for. So hopefully you guys took away some value from today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and send this to a friend if you feel like they need it as well, because a lot of people do struggle with binge eating, restrictive eating, any type of other disorder as well. And maybe the EMDR therapy is the key for them to feel better about themselves and really just form a new belief about themselves instead of living within the old. So hopefully, like I said, you guys enjoy the video. See you guys for another one.